This is the Baymont Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, we're talking about Cain and Abel and the idea of how fear and shame ruin the story.
Indeed. And this is one of my favorite stories, but I don't think we'll have to spend nearly as long with it in order to get the goodness out of it. So
I do feel like at some point in the distant future, we could do like an entire series on this chapter, but also, we can actually get a pretty good chunk in a short amount of time. So we're going to jump right into the text. I just want to make a note that as we are reading, if we don't say otherwise, we're probably reading from the NIV, and there's lots of reasons for that, but it kind of boils down to it's a good balance of like a decent translation coming from a whole field of scholars and group of people working together, and it's also it reads really well in English. And as we go through, we're going to learn how to dig into those original languages. Like if we had nothing else, maybe there's a better thing. If we're only reading in English ever and we're never digging into the original languages, maybe it wouldn't quite be enough. But it's just a good baseline starting point for us. And then we'll dig into, the things where it's like, oh, it seems like we need to consider this context, or we need to consider the meaning of this word, or where these things show up. So there's lots of things. We'll point all of those out as we go along, but we are reading generally from the NIV. So if we don't say otherwise, that is what I'm doing.
Well said. Well said. All right, we're going to be in Genesis 4 today. So speaking of the NIV, give it to us.
Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man."
All right. So Cain ended up being the firstborn. We're going to talk more about what it means to be the firstborn. There's going to be this word that we use called the Bachor in the Hebrew, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. Not too far away into the distant future, but Cain is this firstborn, and then he has this, we're going to read about this brother named Abel. But first, he has this situation where he's named by his mom, and you can read it. I've heard people interpret the story in a way, tell the story in a way, where what she's doing is she's kind of throwing shade at Adam. Like they have this broken relationship. He just blamed her from eating from the tree. Things are rough as they leave the garden. And she's basically saying, I have done this. Me and God have done this. But no mention of Adam, no mention of what he has done or what he can do. You can read it that way. There might even be some interesting ways to read it that way and reasons to read it that way. Foreman suggests, and I find this far more compelling to me. Foreman suggests that what she's doing is she's focusing on this idea of acquisition. The name Cain in the Hebrew, speaks of acquisition. I have acquired a man. How did the NIV say that?
With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man, but
Okay.
It does have a footnote that says, or have acquired a man.
Okay, I have acquired with the help of the Lord. When you hear the word acquired, it's not really a word that we use in our world a whole lot, but when you do think of the word acquired, Brent, what kind of things, what do you think of when you hear that word? What comes to mind?
Yeah, it's like I got something that I didn't really have anything to do with.
I think you've given in the past the example of like an inheritance. You acquire something that you inherited from somebody, you got from somebody, which is exactly what Foreman says about this idea, both in our English understanding, but the Hebrew, like you got it through someone else's. She didn't do this all on her own. She says, with the help of the Lord, I have acquired.
I think the inheritance is maybe a good picture because it's like, well, you're part of the family. You probably had something to do with the success of your parents or your grandparents or whatever to some extent. But in general, I think we would generally consider the creation of life in the womb mostly the work of the Lord. We talk about, Psalm 139, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Like, the Lord's doing most of the work here.
Yeah.
And Adam's not given any credit at all.
Absolutely. And Foreman uses the idea of Thomas Edison making the light bulb as his metaphor and his example. He says Thomas Edison is known for making the light bulb, but what Thomas Edison really did was he just figured out the right combination of materials, but he acquired the light bulb. Like he didn't make the glass. I don't know, maybe he did make the glass, but he didn't make the bulb itself. He didn't put the hardware necessarily. He probably did put it all together, but you get my point. You get Foreman's point. Foreman's point is there's a lot of things he didn't necessarily make directly. He didn't create from scratch all the elements of the light bulb. He figured out how to put the light bulb together. He acquired the invention of a light bulb in a lot of ways through the help of so many other people and what they had made and invented. And I love that because it's a little bit more of a redemptive reading rather than her throwing shade at Adam or disruptive relationships or making her this horrible, selfish sinner. It's a redemptive way of her saying, I understand that what's happening right now is something that I'm not doing by myself.
And Adam is there. Like, you know, if we started halfway through verse 1 and it's like, with the help of the Lord, I've brought forth a man. It's like, well, what happened to Adam? Is this the first virgin birth? Did Mary?
Right. Sure. Absolutely.
But no, Adam, it's right there in the text. Adam made love to his wife Eve and she became pregnant.
Yep.
And so it's like, well, he's there, but who's actually responsible for this?
Totally. And one of the things that Foreman goes on to point out is there's the reason that she gives him the name, but in the Hebraic mind, names are powerful things. Names communicate essence and legacy. They shape you. There's a power to these names. There's a power in the words. They're not just arbitrary. Like in our world, we kind of, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but we pick names kind of based on how we like it or how it sounds or, you know, the initials or whatever. Like we have all kinds of reasons for picking names, but we wouldn't necessarily say the name has any particular power in a person's life. But in the Hebrew mind, in the world of the Bible, names spoke into your identity, the very essence of who you could and would be. And so here's this word acquired, and it's going to somehow in the Hebrew mind play into who Cain is. Cain is somebody that has a deeper than usual relationship with acquisition. So we're going to keep that in mind as we keep reading. But go ahead and give us the next few verses.
Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast.
All right. So we're in the habit of looking for what, Brent?
Problems.
We want to look for problems. We want to avoid our tendency to resolve problems, to ignore problems, to satisfy problems. We want to instead look for them and then chase them, like lean further into them and see what might be going on. And there's a couple of problems here in this little few verses. One is that why does God like one and not like the other? And we're not told. Like we've done all kinds of things people have suggested, like the fat portions. It means that Abel is bringing like better, like Cain's just bringing like regular run of the mill, not the best of the best, but Abel's bringing the best. And that could be in there. The rabbis have some commentary that they notice that, they talk about that. Yet the story doesn't seem to be necessarily begging that question. Similar to the questions we asked last story, I would ask the same question kind of again. What kind of God does this? What kind of a God, like if my two kids, let's say my two kids, each one of them brought me a drawing and they were little kids. And they brought me these two drawings. And let's say one of my kids is definitely gifted in art. They're an artist. And one of my kids is definitely not. and what kind of a dad takes this and goes, oh, Ezekiel, wow, that is a really cool picture. Let me put that up on the fridge. Like, wow, that is cool. And then looks at my other kid and, Abby, what are you, no way. Maybe next time, like try harder next time. Like what? And I know that this is so uncomfortable for us. I know people are like, why are you asking these questions about what kind of, but I think that's actually what these stories are trying to get us to teach, like trying to teach us. They're trying to get us to learn. They're trying to get us to ask the question, what kind of a God are we dealing with? Because by the time we're done with each one of these stories, Brent, what have I discovered about who this God is? This is a God of what?
A God of love.
God of love, a God of acceptance, a God who's full of compassion and grace, a God who meets us where we're at and clothes us in our shame, a God that walks with us every day in the cool of the day. So when you allow yourself to ask the question, what kind of a God is this? On the surface level reading, I notice these problems, but then when I lean deeper into the story, I realize, well, this God actually isn't what I thought he was at all. This God is something. That's why we ask these questions. We don't stop with those questions in an accusatory way. Like, what kind of a God is this? We ask these questions in a way that goes, wait a minute, what am I supposed to learn? Like, this story has to be about something more than how we should offer good sacrifices. This isn't about how do we offer a good sacrifice that pleases God. This story is about who is this God? What is this God like? How does this God relate to us? And so these questions help us answer that. But maybe give us the next verse, Brent.
Well, yeah. And also, like, there's no ongoing conversation after this about, like, well, why was it good or not good? What does favor even mean? Like, does favor mean what we think it means? And, like, God didn't ask for the offerings in the first place. He didn't give any parameters for it.
Right.
And there's no discussion about the offerings at all, really.
And if it is about that, you would expect the conversation to kind of hover there or spend some time there. And yet the story just moves. It just moves on.
Yep, moves right on.
Like this passing mention, and just keeps on going to some other point.
Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast?"
So Cain's name, we said, was connected to the idea of acquisition, like deep in his bones, in a Hebraic sense. His name, his essence, his identity is wrapped up in the fact that he acquires things. And we said that acquiring things is done with the help of others. So his name speaks to, like what he's called every day, speaks to the fact that he has a relationship with God. He needs God. We're told that what is his profession, Brent? Cain is
he worked the soil.
Man, if there's anybody that knows how much they need God, it's Cain. Cain knows that I need rain. I need sunshine. I need things that I cannot control, and I know on some level they're coming from God. I know that I need God. Now, if Cain operates in trust, like if he's somebody that, episode 1, trusts the story, if he trusts that it's a good creation, that there will be enough rain and sunshine to go around, that God loves his creation, thinks it's pretty great, will take care of it. If he trusts, then he'll know that there's enough. He'll put his faith in that. He'll trust the story that there will be enough. But if he has fear that there's not enough, then he's going to see threats to the favor and the love that he thinks is required to get what he needs for the things that he acquires, his acquisition. So if he trusts, he's going to be fine. He'll acquire with the help of God, just like his mom taught him. If he fears, he's going to see threats to that acquisition. So if his brother just gave a gift that God likes, and for whatever reason, God was like, next time, Cain, not a big deal. But I love Abel's sacrifice. What does Cain now see in Abel, Brent?
He sees an enemy, a competitor.
Absolutely. There's only so much of God's favor to go around. There's a limited amount of God's love and acceptance. And here's my brother stealing it all. And if I don't do something, I'm not going to be able to acquire. So he now sees a threat. This is the setup. He's all about acquisition. He needs God's help. Go ahead, Brent. Give us the next verses.
Yeah, let's just back up so that we remember this is God talking to Cain. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth."
Okay, so God, first statement there, why is your face downcast? We said if Cain doesn't trust the story, if he lets fear rule the day, he's going to see everything else. He's going to see other things, at least, as a threat. Because there's only so much of God's love. There's only so much of God's favor. But we know as readers that's at least we're trying to learn that that's not true. There's not a limited amount of God's love and favor and acceptance. We're sometimes afraid that there is. That's what Cain's afraid of in this story. But God's not. God's like, what? Why? There's not a limited amount of my love and favor. Why are you angry? Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what's right, Cain, why are you upset if you just do the next right thing? Like, if you do the next right thing, everything will be fine. I love you. Nothing's changed about that. Like, yeah, his sacrifice was great. You can learn, but who cares? Just do the next right thing. There's no quantitative spiritual bank account of my love and acceptance that has moved. Why are you upset, Cain? Which is an interesting question when it comes to typical Christian theology. Because in typical Christian theology, there's an answer to that. Why is he angry? Why is his face downcast? Well, typical Christian theology would say he's angry because his mom sinned, and now he's a sinner. Because Eve sinned, now Cain's a sinner, and now Cain does wrong things, and Cain is separated from God. And then we bring that Christian theology, and I'm not trying to say that all the stuff I just said was wrong, but what we do is we start with that Christian theology, we project that theology and assume it as we read the story, and then we miss what the story might actually be trying to teach us along the way. Because that's not God's position right now. Like, that's not God's theological argument. God's argument to Cain is, why are you angry, Cain? Why? And you're sitting there going, he's angry because you weren't happy with his sacrifice, God. And God's like, yeah, but who cares? Why are you? You see, God's position on humanity hasn't changed. God kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden. He barred their way. I shouldn't say kicked out. It's too harsh of a language even. He barred the way. He shut off access to the garden, to the tree of life. But God has apparently gone with them, right? Brent, God's in the story here, right?
He's right there.
He didn't stay in the garden and send them away, and now they're on their, like, he's right there. He's with them having a, like, God's position on humanity hasn't changed. Not in this story. Humanity's position on itself has changed. The same thing we noticed in the last story about shame. They now had shame. God's position hadn't changed. He made them naked. He saw their nakedness. They even saw their nakedness and they weren't ashamed, but then they were ashamed. But the one thing that never changed was God. The one thing that never changed was how they were made and how God saw them. God's position on humanity hasn't changed, but humanity's position on itself has changed. It's being ran and ruled by shame and fear. But God apparently, if I take God at his words here, God apparently still thinks that Cain can be who he created him to be. Right now in this moment, Cain, why is your face angry? Why are you downcast? Because if you do what's right, you'll be fine. If you don't do what's right, sin is crouching at its door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. I hear words that I've heard before. What's one of the words that you've already heard in the last story, Brent, that keeps showing up in these lessons?
Desire.
Its desire is for you. There is something about what it means to be human that's in relationship to our desire. And God's expectation in both the Adam and Eve story and now in the Cain and Abel story is part of what it means to be human. Part of how I've made you, Adam and Eve. Part of how I have made you, Cain, is somebody who can look at your desires, look at your fears, look at your shame and say, enough. I'm not going to let you rule the day. I'm not going to let you shape my future. I'm not going to let you. If you do what's right, if you look shame and fear in the face, if you look your desires in the face and say, not today, Satan. I love that meme. You'll be accepted. If you do what's right, won't you be accepted? But if you don't do what's right, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you have to master this. You have to master this beast. You have to master this desire. Of course, Cain's going to fail at that, and the story is going to end in tragedy. But notice the same invitation, the same theme. You can know part of what it means to be human is that you know when to say enough. And I'm not saying that we have the power to do that on our own. That's not the lesson I'm trying to teach right now. The lesson I'm trying to teach, the lesson that I think Jews have taught us, that the Bible is trying to teach us, is what it means to be human, what it means to be made in the image of God. What it means to be made in the image of God is to realize that you are more than an animal. You are more than a beast. And its desire is for us. It's going to be one tricky, that deception that temptation, that whatever you want to call that, is strong and it is real. But what part of what it means is to be human is an invitation to trust that there is a bigger truth, a stronger reality, a better thing on the other side of that. And I just love this story because here's Cain, and God essentially is trying to teach us, my position on you hasn't changed. Yeah, you screwed up. Yeah, you could make a better sacrifice. So make a better sacrifice tomorrow. Like, why are you upset? Don't be upset. Don't let your fear and your shame change your countenance. Just do the next right thing. If you don't do the next right thing, if you let your fear change your countenance, if you let that change you, if you let your position be changed about yourself, you're going to do all kinds of really destructive things. And of course, Cain does. I will recommend, by the way, if you want a deeper dive on this, if you want to read just one of the best books I've ever read on this section of scripture, Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, I would recommend The Beast That Crouches at the Door by Rabbi David Foreman. We'll put a link to that in the show notes of this episode. The Beast That Crouches at the Door. It will blow your mind. He's going to talk about all kinds of stuff. You're going to think that he's lost his mind. You're going to think that you've lost your way. You're going to think you're not. And then he's just going to pull all these things together like a typical Jewish rabbi does. And the things that you will be able to see and learn in there. Just a fantastic book. So if you want to dig deeper, get yourself a copy of The Beast That Crouches at the Door by Rabbi David Foreman and check that out.
I do have one question on the conversation that God has with Cain. And it doesn't even seem like a conversation because it says, the Lord said to Cain, blah, blah, blah. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Blah, blah, blah. And then Cain never says anything in response. So can we assume that Cain knows what to do because otherwise he would ask the question? Or do we assume Cain is already so deep in this place of anger and fear and mistrust that he feels like he can't even ask God? Like he's like, well, then what do I do then?
That's a really, really great question. I don't know if we know from... I'm trying to think that there's going to be a teacher that we're going to meet here very soon that we have on the Bema team. His name's Josh Basse, and he has some incredible teachings and thoughts on this story. And he sees in the next few verses where it says, he's with his brother, and then the brother says, let's go out in the field. And Josh posits that there's some moments in those verses where Cain missed the opportunity to essentially learn what God's inviting him to learn. So how much does he know in that moment? I don't know. Josh would suggest he should have solved that relationship before saying, let's go out to the field. And I've heard Josh do a teaching where it essentially is, no, before you walk out that door, before you cross the threshold, before you go put yourself in a tricky situation, make sure you make that right. Make sure that that relationship is settled, that the fear and shame has been dealt with. Because if you carry that with you out that door into that field, and so what does God know, or what does Cain know? I don't know. That's a great question. What he ends up doing with it is what we seem to find in the story, but what he knows, I don't know. It's a great question to ask.
Yeah. Well, once again, the questions just compound. The more you dig, the more questions you have, and that's fine. That's good. That's the tension that we want to live in, because
indeed,
when we dig into the problems, we dig into the questions, then we find more things and we understand who God is better.
Absolutely. We got some genealogies coming up, Brent, in our book of Genesis. We're not going to deal with those directly. There's going to be some stuff that we're going to skip over here and there, and eventually we're going to start moving through the Bible at a pretty good clip, kind of skipping all kinds of things. But we aren't going to deal with the genealogies because we're learning a brand new way. We're learning a brand new way of reading the Bible. And I don't want to speak down about theology. I mean, one of the genealogies, one of the things that if you were to ask a Jewish reader of the Bible, like, what's one of your favorite parts of the Bible? They're going to say the genealogies. And Brent, as a Western reader, what's probably the most boring part of the Bible for us?
Yeah, exactly. As we've gone through most of the text so far, I think people are like, what are they going to do when they get to Genesis 5? Do we really have to go over all of this stuff?
And we could, because one of the things we're going to learn is that there are treasures buried in genealogies, but we're not probably quite there yet. So we're going to kind of jump over that, and we're going to get into the next story because we need to keep staying in narrative so that we can learn some of these Eastern versus Western ways of engaging the story.
And we will get to genealogies eventually. There will be some that we will cover, but hopefully by the time we get there, you'll be excited about it.
Absolutely. You'll have some tools that will help you have a little bit easier time looking at your genealogies. Absolutely.
Well, check out the show notes for this episode to find a link to the book that Marty recommended. And, anything else you need to find, you can go to BamaDeception.com. Of course, the show notes for the episodes are there, in addition to information on getting into a group or starting a group. Any events that we have coming up, news, anything that we're going to share. If you want to get in touch, you can use the contact page, and that will give you the best and most up-to-date way to get in touch with us. But all of that is on the website. So thanks for joining us on the Bama Podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.
Hello, I'm Kate, a Bama listener from Washington, D.C., and here's the prayer for Episode 3's companion. God, some days I forget where the story begins, the very beginning, when you called me very good. Anxiety strikes, desires abound, and my trust in the story wavers, yet your love is ever present without limits. Thank you for believing that I have the potential to be the person you created me to be, not mastered by fear and shame, but able and ready to do the next right thing. Amen.